Hi all, I'm glad to welcome you to the third episode of the Conversation on Sustainable Mountains podcast, a podcast to talk about the sustainable development of the mountains. My name is Carla Lostrangio from the European Association on Local Innovation, and today I'm here with Kirsty Blackstock. Kirsty, you are a social scientist and you're working at the James Hutton Institute in Scotland. You are also involved in the Moving projects.
So Kirsty, in Moving, you delved into the integrated world of mountain value chains, exploring how they interact with each other. To this scope, you often speak about the assemblage of mountain value chain. For our listener who might be new to this term, could you please explain what assemblage means?
Well, I think I might take three terms. I might talk about mountains, value chains, and assemblage. So for mountains, we think of them as socially constructed areas. They have a biophysical and policy definitions to do with altitude, to do with soil condition, and to do with slope. But they're also places with societal, social, cultural traditions. And we're really interested in how people use these traditions to respond to challenges and create opportunities. So a value chain, also to make sure everyone is clear, simply put, is how we add value from the raw materials coming from our mountain areas to the final end product that is used or enjoyed by the consumer. And initially it was about competitive advantage from individual firms, but now we think about it as a tool for regional development, and therefore we think about values in a wider sense. We think about more than just profit, but also all facets of sustainability, including the environment and social. So what do we mean by an assemblage of value chains? As you implied, Carla, it's really about this idea of connecting things together, of how people and the non-human world, animals, plants, land, interact together in a network of people and things. So it's about interdependency and connectivity. It's a kind of systems thinking. And I really like the fact it draws our attention to the way that things are fluid and dynamic. So there's always the opportunity for change.
And why is it important to understand and map assemblage of value chains?
I think it's important because it can be really positive. It can create synergies. And therefore, if you want to have good mountain sustainable development, you need to be thinking about conflict. You have to think about how to manage it. You have to find common ground. You have to have supportive institutions and policies. It's also great for marketing the brand of the area or the landscape, that you are consistent and coherent in your branding, and you really can market the area in the way that local people recognize, and it improves or builds on cultural traditions rather than undermining them.
In your work, you have pointed out that some of these mountain value chain assemblage needs also upgrading. And I guess that by upgrading, you mean some forms of innovation. Is that correct? And why do value chains need upgrading?
Sure, yes. Upgrading, it's about initially how to improve your own firm, your own business value. But again, in Moving, we broaden this out to think about what does this mean to changes that could be made to the assemblage for the whole mountain area? How do we make things more sustainable or more resilient to change? Now, this often means tapping into the local know-how, as you say, innovation, but innovation that is suitable for mountain areas and also acceptable to local people. It's working with them rather than imposing something from outside. But why do we need upgrading? I mean, some value chains work very well already. They're already very optimized and effective. But there are always vulnerabilities for these mountain areas, and therefore vulnerabilities to the value chain. Some of the key threats that we identified were issues to do with drought and water resources, demographic changes, mainly loss of people, particularly young people, but not always. Sometimes in some areas, they're becoming attractive to retired people, people for second homes, and that actually is also creating some challenges in terms of housing and crowding out local people. There are issues to do with incentives and subsidy change, issues to do with energy prices and inflation. So both environmental and socioeconomic factors were seen as equally important to potentially threatening these value chains and the need to upgrade them or make sure they're resilient.
And so based on your expertise, what are the most upgrading strategies for value chain assemblages in mountains?
So we found from a review of both the value chain literature and the regional development literature, there are kind of 6 key ways that value chains can upgrade or protect themselves from threats. The 6 are product, process, function, interchain or assemblage between value chains, horizontal integration, and vertical integration. So the first type of upgrading strategy is the product. So an obvious thing is if you want to be sustainable and resilient, you want to make sure your product is getting best value. And a really nice example of this is carob, as grown in Crete. It's a traditional crop, always been grown in this area, but in the last few decades, it was really not seen as a valuable crop. It was mainly an animal feed and something that wasn't important. But increasingly, it's recognized as one of the world's superfoods, has lots of health benefits, and therefore it's actually been sort of revalorized as a health food, and that's adding a lot of value to the product. Then the next upgrading strategy is process. And this is how you can improve your process, whether this is about manufacturing, distribution, or even at the consumer end. I really like the example in Switzerland, where the cheese producers, Tetuan, are really thinking about how to reduce their carbon footprint, reduce their greenhouse gas emission. So they are actually using renewable energy technologies to try and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but also help reduce costs and make themselves resilient to these energy spikes. Next, we have function. And this is where people might say, well, our role has really been in this part of the value chain, and we want to actually think about how we can, maybe take on another role in the value chain. And here I turn to an Austrian example. These were sheep farmers, and they were threatened because they were struggling to find a place to slaughter and process their lamb. So they actually created a cooperative where not only did they cooperate as farmers, but they also created and are running their own slaughterhouse. So they have a viable industry in the mountains. Then interchain, this is really this idea of assemblage using a different name. So in the Czech Republic, for example, the Sumova beef works a lot with the rural tourism value chain to really build local demand in this idea of food and drink tourism industry. So the last 2 are about horizontal and vertical integration. And this is really, again, thinking about horizontally how actors in one chain could actually bring themselves together in a kind of more cooperative relationship. Shepherds in Portugal were quite individual, and they were negotiating their milk sales individually with the cheese factory. They're exploring now becoming a cooperative, because this will not only hopefully increase the premium being paid, it also means that it decreases the amount of work they were having to do to negotiate individually. And finally, vertical. This is where the farmers, take for example in Turkey, are working along the chain with the distributors, wholesalers, and even directly with consumers to set up cooperatives to help them have long-term pricing plans and reliable demands so they can manage their production, knowing they'll get a certain price and a certain volume of sales.
Kirsty, this sounds very complete and very huge work also, I guess, from your side. And which actors could be or should be involved in the upgrading of mountain value chain assemblages?
So this is actually one of the most challenging parts of this project. And our mountain value chains are often what's called telecoupled. So although the original production and manufacture may take place in a mountain, often the products are then transported to lowland, to rest of the region, to the wider country, or often globally across the world. And so actually all the actors you need are quite a diverse set of the producers, the manufacturers, the distributors, the people retailing it, and thinking about the needs of the consumers. And that is quite challenging to bring them together in one multi-actor platform. So generally, we've worked a lot with the actors that are in the mountain areas or willing to come to the mountain areas. But in theory, you should involve all of them. I think where we've maybe struggled really is more at the distribution and consumption. And that's something to think about for further research about how we get the consumers of mountain products to tell us more about what would make them pay a premium, what would make them buy more environmentally or socially just products.
And also, what types of skills do you think are the most needed?
And in terms of skills, again, it's a really wide variety. So, of course, you need great ongoing skills in stewardship of the land. You need skills and technical skills in terms of managing your manufacture distribution. There's a lot of technical innovation about improving circular economy techniques, about reducing the footprint on our environment. We also need skills that maintain roads and digital infrastructure in our regions. Keeping a vibrant and viable community needs all the facilities that you want for a good life, healthcare, education. So all of those skills are needed. But I think what we found in terms of the specific contribution of moving around sustainable value chains is this idea of relationships. And how do you build multi-actor platforms? How do you sustain them? How do you manage any conflict? So I think there's a lot perhaps that's not so well thought about in terms of managing relationships, supporting people go through change, helping innovation, giving advice, and tailoring advice to the mountains. Because there's a lot of online advice, but it may not be that suitable for people living in challenging environments that are isolated physically and can't always get to the city for that seminar. So I think it's around perhaps all of those skills, but I think the relational skills is perhaps the area that needs more attention.
Kirsty, it has been great to have this chat together, and thanks for sharing a lot of work in those a few minutes that we had together.
Our next episode will be on foresight and how it can be used to explore mountain future. Stay tuned.